I'm Mark Hunt with McPherson.Tech. If you've ever worked with sound, then you've probably been inundated with terms like high Z, low Z, balanced, unbalanced, XLR, quarter inch, signal to noise ratios, impedance, and all types of things like that. I'd like to give you just a few-minute overview of some of these basics. These are XLR cables. Typically, they're used as mic cables. They have what's called a low Z, and you can just think that as a name. Those of us who are electrical engineers know about impedance and all that type of thing, but just think about a name like Bob and Fred. We call them low Z cables. It's okay to run these cables a long distance, which is what makes them great for the mic cables. They actually have 3 wires. There's a ground, which actually acts as a shield. Then there's a positive negative wire in there. Now that's why we call that a balanced cable. In the balanced cable, when it gets to the soundboard, it actually takes the difference between those cables, and that effectively removes the noise from the cable. That's why we're able to run this such a long distance, a couple hundred feet, without really having signal degradation and having problems with noise on the line. Another type of cable we use is shown here. This is actually the quarter inch cable. Now the quarter inch, you notice, actually has several rings here or one ring here. That's because this is actually a stereo cable and a mono cable. Typically, these cables are used in instruments and devices. Mono cable is usually used in things like guitars, that type of thing. It has what's called a high Z. That means that we need to keep it as short as possible. It's not okay to run these long distances. And there are actually only 2 wires in the mono cable, a ground and shield, and a signal cable. The 3rd wire doesn't make it balanced when we use a stereo cable. That's just an additional signal. So it's like the left and the right. They aren't the same signals, so we can't add them together. So that means that the noise that is part of the signal is actually amplified when we amplify whatever comes over these cables. If you'll be running the unbalanced instrument cables for a long distance to your soundboard, then you may want to use something like a DI box to change the signal from a high Z to a low Z. Now, this is actually the typical DI box. You can find these at a variety of vendors, including sweetwater.com. And these actually convert the signal from the high Z to the low Z that you can then run over a very long distance. Now, you can plug the unbalanced cables as well as the XLR balanced cables directly into many soundboards. There are differences in sound levels between mics and instruments, but balancing those out to optimize your signal and reduce noise ratio is a whole nother topic. Now, you should never have any problems with cables run between your instruments or mics and the soundboard mixer, but be aware there are some bigger and heavier cables that are designed to be run between the amplifiers and the speakers. If you use those bigger, heavier cables for a mic or instrument, then you lose a lot of sound quality. And if you use your smaller mic or instrument cables between the amps and the speakers, then you can actually damage the cables through heat and even damage your amplifiers. It's actually possible for them to actually melt the cables and short things out. So if you ever have a cable running between your amps and speakers that feels really hot, then replace it with the proper cables. Again, that's a whole nother topic. So I hope this very short intro to the difference between high Z, low Z, and XLR, quarter inch, balanced, unbalanced, answers a couple of questions. If not, feel free to let me know and we can talk about some additional details as well. Good day.